What do you do when your wife laughs at the idea of private videos, then you accidentally find one of her with another man hidden in your own living room? How far can she twist the story, turning you into a controlling creep for snooping, while her friends cheer her on for protecting her privacy? And what changes the day, a process server walks into her office lobby and hands her a defamation and privacy complaint based on the very video she swore could never hurt her. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Ilias Verne, and the night my wife turned our living room into a joke about private videos was the same night I realized I had no idea what she was really willing to do when no one was watching. It started simply, the way normal evenings do, with me coming home from the co-working hub, tired from solving small problems for other people, and Karina already on the couch with the TV on and her phone glowing in her hand. She had ordered takeout, which usually meant she was in a good mood, and there were 2 glasses on the coffee table ready for us. I dropped my backpack by the door, loosened my collar, and sat down beside her, enjoying the small moment of quiet before the noise started again. She picked a movie, some light comedy, and halfway through there was a scene where a couple's phone gets stolen and a suggestive video of them leaks everywhere. The audience laughed, the actors shouted, and Karina looked over at me with a smirk that was a little too sharp. She said that everyone had private videos these days, that it was normal, that we were probably the only boring couple left who did not have something like that hiding in a folder somewhere. I told her calmly that I did not need myself on a screen to know my own life, that I preferred memories in my head instead of files that could be lost or stolen. She laughed and shook her head, telling me I was old-fashioned, that confident men did not worry so much about being seen, that only insecure people were scared of cameras. I felt the small sting of the words, but did not rise to them. I just took another bite of food and said I preferred not to have that kind of risk lying around. She rolled her eyes and said something about how I would probably faint if I knew how many couples had entire galleries in their cloud. Then she went back to her phone, thumb moving fast, while I watched the rest of the movie without really seeing it. Later that night, when she went to shower and then to bed, I stayed in the living room to fix a small annoyance with our media player. The streaming box had been freezing on certain apps, and the part of my brain that liked clean systems could not ignore it anymore. I opened the settings, checked the storage, and noticed a strange app showing more used space than it should. It was linked to a cloud account we both used for photos and small videos, mostly birthdays and family dinners. I clicked through the menus slowly, not searching for anything, just trying to clear cache and free memory. That was when I saw it. A folder icon that did not belong with the others sat near the bottom of the list, without a friendly name like holidays or family. It had a string of numbers and letters and a tiny lock symbol, but whoever set it up had forgotten that the thumbnail preview would still appear. In the small square, I saw Karina in lingerie I had never seen her wear for me, in a position that did not belong in any public room, and beside her, though the frame cut off most of his face, I could see the heavy shoulder and a familiar tattoo that definitely did not belong to me. My hand went cold on the remote. For a few seconds, I just stared at the thumbnail, hoping my brain was misreading what my eyes saw. Curiosity and dread pulled against each other, but in the end, I pressed play, letting the file open just long enough to hear a man's low laugh and a few words in Roman's voice, the trainer from her gym, and to see the curve of our own living room wall behind them. That was all I needed. I stopped the video, pressing the button hard enough to make the remote creak, and the screen went dark. The room felt different instantly, like someone had moved all the furniture 2 centimeters to the left. I sat very still, listening to the faint sound of water running in the bathroom, and I let the facts line up in my head. Her jokes about private videos, her late nights at the gym, her sudden interest in phone privacy, and now a recording made in the space where we ate and laughed and watched movies. Anger rose in me like heat, but above it there was something cooler and heavier, a kind of quiet that told me not to move too fast. I knew my own temper well enough to understand that shouting now would only give her a new story to tell later. So instead of storming into the bedroom, I picked up a USB stick from the small bowl beside the TV, plugged it into the streaming box, and copied the file into a hidden folder there. I did not rename anything, I just let the system move the data, watching the small progress bar inch forward. When it finished, I ejected the stick and slipped it into my pocket, feeling its small weight against my leg. After that, I turned on my laptop at the coffee table and opened a blank spreadsheet, the way I always did when I needed to think clearly. In the first column, I wrote dates, starting with the month she joined Roman's gym, then the week she began coming home later than usual, then the night she joked that confident men loved cameras, and finally the date stamp I had seen under the video thumbnail. In the second column, I wrote short notes, just enough to remember: a gym late, phone face down, private video joke, file discovered. I did not give the spreadsheet a clear name, just left it as Sheet 1 and minimized it so the desktop looked innocent, a habit from years of closing things quickly when someone leaned over my shoulder at work. I walked over to the small desk where we kept our paperwork and ran my fingers along the row of binders until I reached the one labeled Utilities. It was thicker than simple bills because over the years I had slid other papers in there, odd receipts, letters, confirmations that seemed worth keeping. I took it out, carried it back to the desk drawer and slid it inside, then turned the small key until I felt the gentle resistance and the soft click of the lock engaging. That quiet sound felt like drawing a very thin pencil line around my own sanity. On my phone, I opened the calendar app and picked a day 1 week ahead, choosing a time that would not disturb my work, so 9:40 in the morning. I typed Kobza Cafe 0940 a.m. into the title, leaving the description empty. I did not know exactly what conversation would happen there or with whom, only that I would need a place away from our walls to say the words out loud and hear how they sounded. I set the reminder, then turned the phone face down on the coffee table, the screen dark. Sitting there in the half-light of the TV menu, I realized I was breathing too fast. I made myself slow it down, counting to 4 in and 4 out, the way I had once learned from a video about panic attacks, and I forced my thoughts into order. I told myself I did not have to decide anything tonight, not about divorce, not about revenge, not about telling anyone else. All I had to do was remember, and remembering was something I knew how to do better than almost anything. As I was thinking that, my phone vibrated softly against the wood, making the screen glow through the case. A new message preview appeared from the contact I had saved only as a single emoji, the person I reached out to when I needed clear words more than comfort. At that exact moment, I heard the metal door latch at the end of our hallway click as Karina pushed it open, her footsteps approaching the apartment with the light rhythm of someone returning from a normal night at the gym, while the small, bright line of text on my screen waited for me to choose whether I was ready to read it. The next morning, I woke up with the same heaviness in my chest I had felt when I locked the drawer, and for a few minutes I almost convinced myself to pretend nothing had happened, to let the video sit as a bad dream inside a plastic stick in my pocket. But Karina moved around the kitchen with a brightness that felt forced, humming and clinking cups, and the contrast between her lightness and the image on that thumbnail made pretending impossible. I walked into the kitchen, sat at the small table, and watched her pour coffee. My voice sounded strange in my own ears when I said there was something we needed to talk about, something I had found while fixing the streaming box. I kept my words simple and slow, describing how I had checked the cloud app, how I had clicked on a folder that did not look familiar, how I had seen a thumbnail that did not belong in any normal collection of family photos. I said I had opened the video just long enough to understand what it was and who was in it, and that I knew it had been recorded in our living room. For a second, her face went completely still, like someone had pressed pause on her. Then she laughed, too loudly, and asked why I had been digging through her private folders, why I had decided to snoop around in things that did not belong to me. She did not deny the video itself. She only attacked the path that brought my eyes to it. She said everyone was entitled to privacy, that I had crossed a line, that it did not matter what I had seen because I should not have seen anything at all. I pointed out, as calmly as I could, that the application was shared, that the folder was on our streaming device, that the video had been recorded in our home and not on some neutral stage somewhere. She waved her hand like I was being dramatic, insisting that the real problem was my obsession with systems and folders, that I had gone looking for something to control. The word control landed hard. She said she felt violated, that I had stolen her personal content, that copying the file, she guessed correctly that I had, was no different than taking her diary and scanning every page. Her eyes got shiny, and she leaned into the role quickly, saying she now felt unsafe with me having that video, that she did not know what I might do with it if I got angry. I told her plainly that I had not shown it to anyone, that I had no intention of sharing it, that keeping a copy was my way of not being gaslit later when memories got blurred. She called that word dramatic, said only abusers talked like that, and promised that if anything ever happened to her reputation, she would tell everyone I had been the one to leak her private video. Somewhere under the hurt, my old work habits nudged me, reminding me that specific phrases could matter later. I finished my coffee in silence, letting her storm around the kitchen, and when she grabbed her bag and left for work, the apartment door slammed a little harder than usual, sending a small shiver through the glasses on the table. After she left, I went back to the living room and opened my laptop. The spreadsheet from the night before waited quietly under the minimized window. I added another line with today's date and a short note. Confrontation, privacy accusations, threat to blame me. Then I opened a new folder on the desktop and named it Archive A, made a copy and named it Archive B, and dragged the video file from the USB into both. I did the same with a few quick screenshots I had taken of the media player screen, where the file name and date were visible next to our device ID. Once those files sat inside both archives, I connected to my cloud storage, the one I used for work backups, and dropped Archive A into it. A small pop-up appeared in the corner of the screen saying, "File uploaded successfully," the same simple phrase I had seen 1,000 times in other people's offices. But this time it felt heavier. I dragged the pop-up to the side and minimized it. On my phone, I opened a blank message thread and titled it "Follow-up" without adding a recipient. In that thread, I wrote a short description of our kitchen conversation, including her exact claim that she now feared what I might do with the video, and her promise to blame me if anything happened to her reputation. I did not send the message anywhere. I just left it sitting there as a small, time-stamped log. Then I put on my jacket, slipped the USB stick back into the pocket, and headed to work. At the co-working hub, the air smelled like coffee and printer toner, like always. But the way people looked up when I walked in felt a little different. 2 people in the shared kitchen were staring at a phone and went quiet when they saw me. I told myself it could be anything, that I was being paranoid, but when I sat down at my desk and opened my email, I saw a new notification float into the corner. A social media tag with my name attached to a story Karina had posted an hour earlier. I clicked, knowing I should not, and watched a short clip where she filmed herself in soft light, talking about digital boundaries. She said that sometimes the person who promised to protect you could turn into the one who violated you, that she had learned the hard way what it felt like when someone you love went through your cloud and copied intimate content without consent. She did not say my name, but the tag sat there anyway, small and undeniable. In the next story slide, she wrote that she would not be silent about digital abuse just because the abuser shared her address. The word abuser made my hands tighten on the mouse, but again, I did what I knew how to do. I took screenshots of each frame, saved them into Archive B, and closed the app. A little later, while I was helping a client on the phone, I noticed 2 colleagues whispering near the coffee station, their eyes flicking toward me and then away again. I pretended not to see. On my lunch break, I walked past the gym where Roman worked, because it was on my route to the supermarket. Through the glass, I saw him at reception, leaning on the counter, laughing with another trainer. For a second, I imagined walking in, putting the USB on the desk, and asking him if he enjoyed starring in secret films in other men's living rooms. My fingers curled into a fist inside my pocket, but I kept moving, telling myself that anything I did in that direction would only make her story about a dangerous, controlling husband easier to sell. At the supermarket, 2 women stood ahead of me in the pharmacy aisle, talking in large, casual voices about a post they had seen about a man who went through his wife's files and stole a private video. One of them said she would call the police if her partner ever did that men who behaved like that were unpredictable. The other said she hoped the woman in the story had friends to protect her. They had no idea the man from the story was standing a few feet behind them, holding a basket with bread and milk. I paid quickly and left without saying anything. Back at the hub, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and watched that small cloud sync pop-up appear again as Archive B finished backing up in the background. I moved it aside with the same quick motion as before. As I did, a new email notification slid into the corner of my screen from my manager, Anton, with a short subject line that said there had been a few things online he wanted to discuss, and asking if I could stop by his glass office for a quick word in the morning. Dasha's message about the rooftop party landed just after lunch, a bright invitation full of emojis and rooftop views that would have felt harmless any other week, but now it just made my stomach twist. She wrote that it was a reset night, that everyone needed to relax, that I should come with Karina so we could show everyone we were okay. The way she phrased it told me immediately that Karina had already been talking about us, probably in the same soft victim tone she used in her story slides. That evening, when we stepped out of the elevator onto the rooftop, the air smelled like sweet drinks and city dust, and strings of small lights hung above the crowd like captured stars. Music thumped from a speaker, and people lounged on low couches or leaned on the railing, phones in their hands, screens glowing like extra faces. Karina slipped away from my side almost immediately, greeting people with quick hugs, her voice floating over the music as she told fragments of her story. I stayed near the edge at first, hands in my pockets, looking down at the street far below and listening more than watching. It did not take long before I heard my own life summarized in 3 sentences by someone who barely knew me. A woman in a red jacket said she admired Karina for standing up for herself, that it took courage to speak openly about digital abuse. Another nodded and said she had seen the story about a man who went through his wife's cloud and copied a private video, and that such men could not be trusted not to leak things. I could hear my name woven into their sentences like a small curse word. A little later, Dasha called everyone closer to the bar for a toast. She stood on a small step, holding a glass, her phone set up on a stand pointed at her face and the crowd behind her. She spoke about boundaries and trust, about how in modern relationships privacy was as important as loyalty, and she said she was proud of a dear friend who had spoken out against someone who violated both. She did not say my name, but everyone knew which friend she meant, and several people turned their heads slightly to look at me as they clinked glasses. Karina stood near her, eyes shining, nodding at all the right places. When the toast ended, Dasha called Karina forward for what she called a mini-talk about digital safety. Multiple phones came up at once, screens recording, notifications blinking as followers joined the live stream. I watched from a few steps back as Karina told the story again, adjusting the details to fit the mood. She said she had discovered her husband had gone through her cloud, that he had copied an intimate video she had made during a difficult time, and that she had felt scared he might use it to control her. The word blackmail did not leave her lips yet, but it hovered in the air as she said she now slept with her phone under her pillow and had changed all her passwords. People murmured, some in sympathy, some in outrage, but no one asked what was on the video or why it existed in the first place. Ilya, the DJ, made a joke about old-fashioned men being afraid of cameras, and the crowd laughed. I stood by the railing, breathing slowly, reminding myself that any outburst from me would become another clip labeled aggressive husband. A few minutes later, Dasha walked over to me, her camera still in her hand, and said in a light voice that it was brave of me to show up, that it was a good sign for Karina's healing. I told her, in a calm tone, that I did not agree with the way the story was being told, that there was more to it than digital abuse. But she lifted her shoulders and said she was not taking sides. She was just supporting her friend and raising awareness. Then she turned away, already composing another caption in her head. During a quieter moment near the snack table, I saw a group of guys from Karina's gym talking in the corner. Roman was among them, leaning against the metal railing, his relaxed posture and easy smile unchanged, as if he had never set foot in my living room in that particular way. One of his friends spoke loudly about a crazy husband who found a file he was not supposed to see, and everyone laughed, the sound carried by the wind. Roman said something I could not fully hear, but I caught the phrase, "should have cleaned the cache," and the group burst out again. For a second, the image of me crossing the rooftop and punching that smile off his face flashed in my mind, but I let it pass, like letting a notification fade without tapping it. I knew that any physical move would instantly confirm the version of me Karina had been selling. Instead, I turned away and walked to the other side of the rooftop, where the city lights swallowed my reflection in the glass. When we finally left the party, the elevator seemed too small for all the words that had been spoken. In the lobby, my brother Marco waited by the entrance. He had stopped by because I had texted him earlier, asking for a ride. He saw Roman leave the building with some friends, laughing, and his whole body went tense. He stepped forward with his fists half clenched, ready to talk, but I placed my hand on his shoulder and told him, in a low, steady tone, that this was exactly what they wanted, to see me surrounded by wild men, proving that I was dangerous. He stared at me, breathing hard, then cursed under his breath and walked back toward the car. Roman glanced in our direction, then looked away, not eager to test his good luck. On the drive home, Marco said he did not understand how I could stay so calm, but I told him this was not calm, it was survival. That night, after Karina went straight to bed without a word, I sat at the desk in the living room with my laptop open. I found Dasha's new post from the party, her stories with text about healing from digital abuse, and the short clips where Karina gave advice about privacy. I used a simple screen recording tool to save them, storing each file carefully into Archive A and Archive B. Then I opened a new spreadsheet and wrote down initials and dates in tidy rows. DP, Rooftop Live, Healing from Digital Abuse. NS, Repeated Abuser Story at Bar. RD, Joked about cleaning cache with friends. The act of writing their initials stacked them into something more solid than blurry faces in a noisy night. When I tried to print out a small summary of these names and phrases, the printer hummed for a moment and then spit out a completely blank page. I stared at the empty sheet, thinking how fitting it was. In public, my side of the story was invisible, while hers covered every screen. I placed the blank page on top of the printer, then took the USB stick I had labeled with the date and set it beside the sheet, a small, quiet weight, holding down nothing. The room smelled faintly of warm plastic and printer toner, the air that always followed long evenings of quiet work. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed on the table. A notification popped up from a new group chat created by one of Karina's friends. The title, Something Light About Rooftop Real Ones, and inside, photos and clips from the night were already piling up. At that moment, another flash went off in my mind. Memory of the rooftop when someone shouted for one last story and bulbs fired from several phones at once. catching my pale face near the railing. That moment, the camera flash blinding me while a fresh group chat ping exploded across half the phones in the room, became the hook that dragged everything into the next part of this story. The family dinner was Svetlana's idea, which meant it was never really about peace. It was about staging a scene where she could direct the script. We met at a family restaurant on a busy Friday evening, a long table set up near the back wall with cheap flowers and laminated menus. Karina wore a soft sweater and no makeup, the kind of look that said, tired but brave, and her parents were already seated when we arrived, Svetlana with her back straight as if she were about to take a patient's details, and Yuri staring down at the cutlery like it might give him instructions. My mother, Olena, sat at the other end of the table, her hands folded, her eyes on me in that way that meant she was counting, measuring how much of myself I still had left. At first the talk stayed on safe topics like weather and food prices and some neighbor's broken elevator. But I could feel the real conversation waiting like a heavy plate still in the kitchen, ready to be carried out. It was Svetlana who brought it in. She cleared her throat and said she had something serious to discuss, that we could not keep ignoring the situation, as she called it. She started gently, saying she knew relationships were difficult in this modern digital world, that sometimes people made mistakes, but then her voice sharpened as she looked straight at me and said she would not stay silent while her daughter lived in fear. Fear was a big word to drop in a family restaurant with children eating pizza at nearby tables. I asked, in as steady a voice as I could, what exactly Karina was afraid of. Before Karina could speak, Svetlana cut in and said her daughter was scared that I would leak a private video she had made during a hard time, that I had copied it from her cloud without her consent and now used it like a weapon. She said the word weapon with care, almost like she wanted each letter to hang in the air long enough for everyone to hear. I kept my hands flat on the table. I said calmly that I had found the video on our shared device, that it had been recorded in our own living room with another man, and that I had saved it because I knew memories could be twisted later. I reminded them that I had never sent it, never shown it, never even threatened to. Karina shook her head, tears already shining on her lashes, and said that might be true today, but what about tomorrow, or in a year, when I got angry or wanted to punish her? She said I had all the power now, that she was exposed and at my mercy, and that no woman should have to live like that. I felt the room tilt slightly as other diners turned their heads for a second, then pretended to mind their own plates. Svetlana pressed her advantage. She said a real man would have deleted the file immediately, that keeping it meant I was holding it over Karina's head, maybe waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate her. She said she worked in a clinic and had heard too many stories of men leaking intimate content when relationships ended, and that if anything like that ever happened to her daughter, she would make sure everyone knew I was responsible. At that point, the word blackmail finally came out. She said she would not allow her daughter to be blackmailed inside her own marriage. I could see Yuri flinch at the word, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth, but he did not speak. My mother shifted in her chair, her expression tightening. I took a slow breath, held it, and let it go. Then I said, still in that quiet tone I had almost trained into myself, that I had never once threatened to share the video, that I had never used it to demand anything, that all I had done was see the truth and keep proof of it. I said if anyone was going to talk about blackmail, they should be careful with that word, because it carried a weight that did not match what had happened. Karina wiped her eyes and said the very fact that I had the file was a threat, that I did not need to say the word out loud for it to hang over her. She said she had felt watched ever since, like every time she posted something or went out with friends, I was waiting to act. Svetlana nodded and told my mother that this was what abuse looked like these days. Not bruises, but screenshots and USB sticks. At that, Olena finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firmer than usual. She said accusing someone of blackmail and abuse was serious, and that if those accusations were going to be repeated in public, then everyone needed to be sure they matched the facts. She asked in a simple tone whether I had ever actually threatened to share the video or demanded anything in exchange for keeping it private. Silence stretched for a few seconds, like the tablecloth itself was holding its breath. Karina did not answer the question directly. She said it was about how she felt, about the fear, about the power imbalance. Svetlana said feelings were valid evidence, that her daughter's fear was enough for her. Yuri opened his mouth, then shut it again when Svetlana gave him a sharp look. I looked at my mother, and in her eyes I saw not just worry but calculation, as if she was stacking words into small invisible piles. The food arrived, plates of steaming dishes that no one really wanted anymore. We chewed and swallowed because it gave our hands something to do. At one point, I noticed a woman at a nearby table looking over with careful eyes, as if she had heard the phrase, leak a private video, and was trying to work out who she should pity. When the bill finally came, everyone pretended to be busy with wallets and phones. We walked out into the cool evening. I kissed my mother on the cheek and told her I would come by later in the week. Her hand squeezed my arm a little longer than usual, and she simply said, "We will talk." Inside that small sentence, I heard everything she was not saying yet. A few days later, I sat in her kitchen, the familiar smell of tea and fried onions wrapping around us like an old blanket. On the wall, her paper planner hung in its usual place. I saw that a date near the middle of the month had been circled in red, more heavily than any other, with the words "meeting," personal, written next to it in her narrow handwriting. On the fridge, a small yellow sticky note with the words "Bring Forms" sat under a magnet shaped like a coffee cup. I did not ask her what those notes were for. She did not volunteer the information. Instead, she listened as I retold the dinner, the words blackmail and abuse, the way Svetlana had promised to tell everyone my name if anything happened online. My mother stirred her tea slowly and said that some lies were big enough that they needed to be handled outside the dining room. Before we left, I opened the hallway cabinet where I kept some old documents and took out a folder labeled Household, slipping it into my backpack. The zipper's soft sound felt like another pencil line drawn, thin but real. That night, back at our apartment, I stood on the balcony while Karina paced in the living room, talking on the phone in a low voice. Through the half-closed door, I heard the word blackmail again, said with a kind of drama she never used when speaking to me. Below, the streetlights turned the parked cars into dull shapes. A light came on in Mrs. Kravitz's window. She stepped onto her small balcony and glanced up at us, her eyes passing over me and then down to the phone glowing in Karina's hand. I went back inside and set my mother's household folder on the desk. My phone buzzed, and when I checked it, I saw a missed call notification with no caller ID, labeled simply private, and a new voicemail waiting in the inbox. At the same moment, my mother's earlier word, "handled," echoed in my head like a door quietly opening to the next room. The days after that dinner felt like walking through a house that had been rearranged overnight, everything in the same place but somehow wrong, in ways only I could feel. I moved more of my things into the guest room, not with slamming doors or dramatic speeches, just quiet trips down the hallway with folded clothes and a few books in my arms. When Karina noticed the empty space on my side of the wardrobe, she followed me, her voice sharp, asking if I wanted to punish her by making the apartment feel like a hotel. I told her calmly that I needed a room where no one shouted words like blackmail and abuse at me, that it was better for both of us if I slept where the air was lighter. She said this was emotional cruelty, that I was turning our home into a courtroom where she was always on trial. I did not argue with the metaphor. I simply laid my shirts in the drawer of the guest bed unit and placed my phone charger on the bedside table, creating a small, simple space that belonged to me again. Online, her post shifted tone in a way that would have impressed me as a marketing man if I had not been the subject. She went from talking about healing to talking about survival. In one post, she posed by the window with rain behind her, writing about women whose private memories had been taken hostage by men they trusted. She did not use my name, but she mentioned a husband who copied a private video and kept it in a drawer, using it as silent pressure. In another, she wrote that some abuse left no bruises, only USB sticks and screenshots, and that these scars were harder to see. The comments came in with a rhythm of hearts and fire emojis, people calling her brave, telling her to leave, saying men like that never changed. I took screenshots of each post, making sure the date and time were visible, then filed them into Archive A and Archive B without answering or reacting publicly. At work, Anton called me into his glass office with the same careful face he used for client complaints. He said he had seen some things online, that he did not want to interfere in personal matters, but that he needed to know if there was any risk of our company name being dragged into some kind of digital scandal. He mentioned that Karina had tagged me in a few posts and that my profile still showed where I worked. I told him, in a steady tone, that there was no danger of me leaking anything, that I had not shared any private content and never would, and that the situation at home was difficult but under control on my side. He nodded slowly, then suggested that for now I might want to remove my workplace from my public profile and make my settings more private, just to create some distance. I agreed, not because I was ashamed of where I worked, but because it made sense to close one more window she could lean through. At lunch, I sat alone in a corner of the co-working kitchen, listening to the low hum of other people's conversations, and felt an odd kind of calm settle over me. I realized that I was done trying to fix the story with patience alone. That evening, I took a bus to my mother's flat, with the household folder in my backpack and my laptop under my arm. The stairwell smelled like dust and old cooking, the familiar scent of my childhood. Helena opened the door before I knocked twice, as if she had been standing there listening for my steps. In her living room, we cleared the small table and laid everything out. I opened the household folder and the other bundles of papers I had stuffed into the utilities binder over the years. Bank statements, rent receipts, employment contracts, and printouts of a few key posts all formed small islands of paper on the table. My mother brought out 3 new binders she had bought without telling me, their spines blank and clean. She passed me a black marker and watched as I wrote home on one spine, auto on the second, and bank on the third. We moved the pages together, sliding each one into a clear plastic sleeve and snapping the binders closed with a soft click. Under the folder marked taxes, she handed me a strip of tape and a small USB drive. I taped the drive under the plastic pocket in a place you would not see unless you knew to look, and she nodded with a quiet kind of satisfaction. On my laptop, I cleaned up the desktop, dragging stray files into the 2 main trees, Archive A and Archive B, until the screen looked like a simple, tidy map instead of a battlefield. When that was done, I opened a browser and typed in a few phrases that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with preparation. Storage options, delivery tracking, notary near me. I read about lockers and courier services and small offices where people stamped papers to say they had seen them. I did not search for court names or legal procedures, not yet. I knew there was a line I was not ready to cross until my mind was settled. My mother watched my face as I read, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Finally, she asked gently whether I had decided what I wanted. I stared at the list of local notaries for a moment, then closed the browser tabs one by one. I told her I knew what I did not want. I did not want to spend the next years defending myself against stories, twisting my own life into replies under her posts. I did not want to explode in a way that gave them a new chapter called The Night He Finally Snapped. I said I would not hit anyone, shout in their faces, or threaten to leak anything. I said I would not become the monster they had been practicing for. But I also said, for the first time out loud, that I was done being the soft ground their lies walked on. I told her I would handle everything properly from now on, in ways that left marks in places more solid than timelines and stories, and that if they wanted to say the word blackmail again, they would have to say it in rooms where words were written down instead of just shared. She nodded, her eyes tired but proud, and said that was all she had been waiting to hear, not revenge, just a plan that did not destroy me to save them. A few days later, on a gray morning that smelled like wet concrete, I got off the bus one stop early and stood across the street from the courthouse, watching people go in and out with folders under their arms. I did not cross, I just stood there long enough to see that the building was real and not some abstract threat. Then I boarded another bus and went on to work. That evening, back at my mother's, I sat again at the table with my laptop. I checked Archive A and Archive B, making sure the newest screenshots of posts and comments were in place. Then I plugged in a single USB stick I had labeled with the date in small letters and copied both archives onto it. The progress bar moved slowly, and when it finished, a tiny Cloud Sync pop-up appeared in the corner of the screen, announcing that files had been uploaded successfully. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed on the table. A message preview appeared from the contact saved as a single emoji, the person I had met for coffee at a small table under my calendar reminder. The text said the draft for next week was ready and asked if I was still sure. I looked at the binders on the table, at the circled date on my mother's planner across the room, at the USB taped under taxes, and the neat lines of folders on my screen. I felt my heartbeat slow instead of race. I typed back, "Thank you, I am ready." And as the Cloud Sync window faded and the room settled into its usual quiet hum, I understood that saying I would handle it properly had stopped being an idea and turned into the first step of a path I would not step back from. On the morning, everything shifted from stories to paper. I stood in the lobby of the office tower where Karina's firm rented 2 bright glass floors and pretended to study the building directory. People flowed past me with coffee cups and ID badges, the air smelling of perfume, printer toner, and wet umbrellas. I wore the same jacket I always wore, nothing dramatic, and I stayed near a column, far enough that no one could say I had cornered anyone. I knew from the message on my phone what time her workday usually started. I had walked these sidewalks before, counting minutes. At 8:55, the elevator doors opened and Karina stepped out with 2 coworkers, talking quickly, hands moving as she said something about men who weaponize your digital past. One of them laughed in that eager way people do when they want to stay in the main character's light. Before she reached the turnstiles, a plain-looking man in a dark jacket approached her, holding a thick envelope. He checked a page on his clipboard, asked her full name and date of birth in a clear, neutral voice, and when she confirmed, he handed her the envelope and said this was a civil complaint and related documents. She blinked, confused, until she saw my surname on the first page visible through the plastic. Her voice rose a little as she demanded to know what this was, and he answered calmly that it was a defamation and privacy complaint regarding public statements about blackmail and digital abuse, plus a petition for divorce with temporary orders, all filed and logged. The receptionist looked up, Her coworkers fell silent. As Karina read the words defamation, takedown, and misuse of intimate content, the elevator bell chimed again behind her, spilling more people into the lobby. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a new message from the emoji contact. Service confirmed and logged. Ilias, that's it. I turned toward the revolving doors, stepped out into the cool air, and let the heavy glass close behind me.